All right, I want to thank Steve Akers for filling in during my absence last week. I greatly appreciate that. You know, since I began that study, I look for how common Ecclesiastes is in things that surround us. And Sunday morning in Scott's sermon, he referenced Romans 1:28. And Romans 1:28, he talked about how that was when man turns to himself. When man turns to himself, he has a depraved mind. And that's what we're seeing in Ecclesiastes. Man is looking around and he's looking at himself and turning to himself, and God's not involved. And that gives up a depraved mind. And also stumbled across Psalms 89, verse 47. Remember how short my time is. For what vanity have you created all for the children of man? So, people have always struggled with what's the meaning of life? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? So, we talked about Koheleth. Who's Koheleth? The preacher, the speaker, the presenter, the one who gathers an audience and makes a pronouncement and proclamation. Now, who does that verse 1 imply that the speaker is? Solomon. Okay. So, why would someone as with all the wisdom in the world and who has the authority of the throne, why do you not say it's Solomon? Why would he choose the term speaker? And not only that, speaker has a feminine connotation. He didn't use a masculine word for speaker or presenter. Why would he do that? Any clue? Is he that humble of a person? Hey, he's not approaching that as a king. That's a good one. But I think if we look back, what other books did Solomon write? Song of Solomon and Proverbs. What's Proverbs about? Wisdom. Proverbs 1:20, how did he describe wisdom? Wisdom had a feminine connotation. So the implication here, I am a speaker, and I'm saying this from a feminine connotation because wisdom is personified as being female. So all you ladies should appreciate that. Tell your husband, you know, we have wisdom. So, all right. The book has a chiastic structure, A, B, C, C, B, A. Second verse is the same as the last verse. So it gives you an introduction, he gives you a conclusion. It's exactly the same. So we have bookends here. Vanity of vanity. All is vanity. So vanity is hevel. What's hevel? What's vanity mean? Emptiness, smoke, wind. Can you grasp it? You know it's there, but you can't lay onto it. There's no substance. Now, in a first lesson when I was here, I talked about there's a famous Bible character who has the same name as vanity. Hevel, does that ring a bell? What famous Bible character? Predates Solomon. Genesis. Hevel sounds like Abel. Hevel, translated in Spanish and English, is the name Abel. Cain and Abel. Who was the first person to lose their life? Abel. So the first person who lose their life has a name that meant emptiness, can't be grasped. So how much of a connection is there between the name of the first person to lose their life on earth and this idea that our life is empty? All right, so we see that our life has no substance. So we talked about under the sun. What's the idea of under the sun? On earth. So I'm looking around, and I'm making some observation. So, but what doesn't he do? Which direction doesn't he look as he looks around on earth? He doesn't look up, does he? He doesn't look vertically to God. And he keeps asking the question, what does it profit? He's always looking at the bottom line, isn't he? Where's the meaning of life? I want to know what the bottom line is. I want an answer. So that's a very common problem that we all, men from all time, have asked. As we look at that, we want to make a connection to the New Testament and throughout the Bible, just like Hevel, vanity, is the same name as Abel. When we look at the Hebrew Bible, the term for mankind is Adam. The first man is the same word used for mankind. The same word for vanity is the same as the first person who lost their life. All right, so last week Steve covered the prologue. So just like the introduction verse and the concluding verse are exactly the same, there are other bookends. So there's a prologue and there's a conclusion that mirror one another. So Steve covered that last week. Talks about how life is very mundane. There's an oppressive monotony. It just sort of goes on and on. So, verse 3 to 11 is the prologue. So verse 3, why do we have to do all this work? Life on earth is tough, isn't it? It's a challenge. A generation comes and a generation goes. Death happens. And I keep looking around. But he doesn't look at the soul, does he? Is there a concept of the soul? All he sees is what looking around. And then he talks about these unchanging cycles. The sun rises, the wind blows, and all streams go to the sea. So he's looking at nature. He's giving you an example of this repeating cycle. So, the sun rises, the sun sets. Is there ever any end? The sun goes down, but it's going to keep circling around. That cycle never ends, does it? It's unending. It's unchanging. It's consistent. How about the wind? North, south, east, west. Can you predict which way the wind's going to blow? To what degree? The wind is restless. It's not consistent, is it? If you have a sailboat, can you always count on the wind? There's this unpredictability. There's this restlessness. Now, wind is often translated from the word hevel. So as we go through here, we need to look for couplets. We talked about that in Lesson 1, the literary structure. There are couplets all throughout this. There are couplets within a verse where he couples two ideas, and there are couplets within a section. So he talked about vanity, vanity, which is a concept of wind. It's also translated breath, as in breath of life. And all of a sudden, the second thing he mentions is wind, which the Jews would recognize as almost the same word. So we see these couplets that we have to look for. Sometimes a couplet is for emphasis, the vanity of vanity. That means the most vanity. It's hammered as to give it extra emphasis. And sometimes it couples two different aspects of the same thing. And oftentimes in poetry, there's wordplay. Not quite a pun, but it's similar wordplay. And then the sea. Does the sea ever fill up? Do we have to worry about the sea overflowing? So the sea is never filled. It's unsatisfied. So we see that when he looks at nature, we have these unchanging cycles, we have this restlessness, and we have this unfulfilled unsatisfaction. There's always hungering and thirsting. That describes mankind, doesn't it? What's our life? We go to work. We get up, we eat, we go to work. We go home, we eat, we go to bed, we get up. We've got this unending cycle, don't we? We've got this restlessness. What's going on with my life? Where's meaning? And we always want something more, don't we? So here's this parallel between, he's giving examples of nature, but it mirrors our life, doesn't it? Now, innovations occur. We know that. We live in a much different time, but Does man struggle with any different problems than he did in the time of Solomon? This was written 3,000 years ago. You're shaking your head. Eye is not satisfied with seeing, and ear is not satisfied with hearing. We see people doing this all the time, don't we? Why? Their eye's not satisfied with seeing, is it? They want more. They want more. They want to be entertained. So they're trying to find some sense of satisfaction. So it hasn't changed. There's nothing new. Where is new stuff? Where do you find new stuff? Jesus gave us a promise of what? A new life in a new world or a new creation. After we're baptized, we're a new man. So here on earth, we can't find satisfaction, can we? There's no satisfaction. We have a soul within us. Is our soul finite or infinite? Infinite. Can an infinite soul find meaning in finite things? No. So what's our life going to be? We're going to have this endless cycle that's hungering and thirsting for something that's not going to be found here. Have something to say? All right. So we have the prologue. He's going to mirror this with a conclusion. So man's life is pointless. The world turns on and on. Man lives a brief time. It seems like the earth is here forever. And he's going to reflect. Enjoy life while you can. You know, the summation, eat dessert first, you're going to die. That's his view. He can't see upward. He's just looking around. All right, so we're up to date. Now, the first section, he's going to start getting in meat. He says, I'm going to conduct a scientific investigation. I'm going to see what's going to happen. So he's going to explore different philosophies, different mindsets, different lifestyles. And we describe a lot of these philosophies and mindset as different isms. So what are some of the isms that he explores? Or what are some of the isms that we see people participate in now that they toy with? He's going to toy with hedonism, isn't he? Materialism. What's one of the isms of our culture? Consumerism. How about cynicism? He's quite cynical. He keeps seeing the wrong things. He's a fatalist. Fatalism. Is he upbeat? Is he optimistic? A lot of pessimism, isn't there? How about narcissism? Are we going to see narcissism in here? Are there any isms that are good? The only two I can think of are evangelism and baptism. All the other isms are pretty bad, aren't they? So he's going to explore all these philosophies so that we don't have to. The common ism of our time is existentialism. You know, that's the common philosophy on college campuses today and throughout modern culture. And basically, it's the idea that there's no reality. There are no absolutes. It's whatever works for you. You create your own reality. In essence, you become your own God. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Does this make people happy? We see that, don't we? If I create my own reality, I can say, I'm a pencil. Is that connected to reality? Am I a pencil because I say so? But we see people within culture, they're saying, I'm this or I'm that, and it's disconnected to reality. And are they happy when they do that? Does that bring them peace and satisfaction? Albert Camus, who wrote the definitive work on existentialism, he entitled his book Nausea. How would you entitle a book Nausea? because he said this philosophy is so utterly depressing. And we see that. We see people who have these struggles, who have adopted existentialism within our society. Are they happy, upbeat people? They're their own gods. Can a finite individual take the place of the infinite God? So they can't find satisfaction, can they? And then there's the happiness formula. What's the happiness formula? What do you do to be happy? I want to have fun. This is squeezed down, so it's actually a formula. Happiness equals N times F. Happiness equals the number of times I have fun. The more times I have fun, the more happy I'm going to be. Is that true? People, even a comedy club, should be the happiest people in the world, shouldn't they? Does that bring satisfaction? So when we're looking for happiness, what are we feeding? We're feeding the finite man. But the finite man has an infinite soul. And that's what the author struggles to recognize. So he's going to begin his experiment in verse 12. So he starts off, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek out and search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is unhappiness business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that's done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked can be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. He said, I'm going to seek and search out wisdom. The first thing is, I'm using wisdom and knowledge to look for an answer. So he starts off by reintroducing himself and giving his credentials. Why do you think he does that? Why is that important? Who's going to have more resources to do it? I've got the power of the throne. I control every aspect of this nation, and at that time, we're the dominant force, courtesy of David. And I have all this divine wisdom. So he's saying, I've got every resource to make this happen. Now, is this going to be just a passing fancy of some powerful person? Shaking your head, no. I applied my heart to seek it out. So he's very dedicated. He's going to do a thorough and a lifelong pursuit. Now, verse 13, this is the first time we see God mentioned. So, he's going to mention God 37 times. Now, what God is this? I know a lot of you have been through Old Testament studies before. What are the two terms for God in the Old Testament? Yahweh? Who's Yahweh? Yahweh is Jehovah, the God of the Israelites. And what's the other word for God? Elohim. Very good. So Elohim implies deity. It could be any God. When they talk about the gods of the Canaanites, they'll use the word Elohim. Yahweh is only used about the God of the Israelites. So, what Solomon claimed to fame? What is his big accomplishment as king? What does he accomplish in a nation? He builds a temple. Okay, he builds a house for Yahweh. He's going to mention God 37 times in this book. How many times does he mention Yahweh? He spends 7 years and lots of extravagant resources for Yahweh. How many times is Yahweh here? Okay, 37 times. So over 30, over 20, over 10, 0. So why wouldn't Solomon mention Yahweh if he's going to refer to God? Don't you find that curious? So, is he writing because this is a message that's not unique to God's people? Like the story of Job? It's not a message unique to God's people only? Or what happened as Solomon got old? How many wives did he have? Too many. 700 and 300 concubines. Were they all Israelites? No, they were foreign alliances, and he accommodated them. And we see this apostasy. So, the smartest person in the world wasn't immune from the consequences of sin, and he deviated. So we see characteristics in this book that he's late in life. He's looking back and he's writing a reflection. This is what I figured out. Don't do this. An old man's advice to a younger generation. And he sees this changing that's going on. But he's drifted. He's drifted from the individual who built a house for Yahweh. And he recognizes that there's deity, but he's not recognized, is he? All right, chapter 14. I've seen everything done under the sun, and all is vanity. So he goes back to what we saw with sun, wind, and water. It's an endless cycle, it's restless, and it's unchanging. I used every bit of wisdom and smarts I could as the smartest man in the world. He said, what is crooked can't be made straight, and what is lacking can't be counted. What do you think that means? Do we hear those terms anyplace else? Luke 3:5. Christ came to make the crooked straight. So is it within man to find a direction for the finite soul? God's going to provide a direction for the finite soul, isn't he? All right. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are in Jerusalem before me, and my heart has great experience in wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also striving after the wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So, he doesn't spend a lot of words on this. He gets quickly to the point. He says, I looked at the contrast. I couldn't find it in wisdom, so I looked at it from a negative point of view. I look at folly and madness, and I didn't find any clues there. I'm unsatisfied. And in much wisdom is vexation. You know, Jason has spent an incredible number of years in higher education. And I'd be willing to tell you that the more he knows about his field, the more he realizes there's a lot I don't know. Isn't that with everything? The more we know, the more we realize we don't know. And that's what Solomon says. We can't find it all. He who increases much knowledge increases sorrow. All right. We're 3 weeks in, and we finally finished the first chapter. And now you're wondering if we're going to be able to finish the book on time. Yes, we will. This is poetry. It is not a steady story. There are certain principles that we need to build on from the first few chapters. There's a division at about chapter 6. So we're going to spend 2/3 to 3/4 of our time in the first 6 chapters. So while it took us 2.5 weeks to get through chapter 1, chapter 2 is going to drag slowly, and we're going to pick up speed as we go, and we'll finish right on time. So don't worry about that. All right, chapter 2. Who said, I couldn't find meaning and wisdom. I'm going to look for meaning in pleasure and wealth. So I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, there's also vanity. This is also vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad. I said of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, and how to hold still on folly, till I might see it was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. So, when he strives after pleasure and wealth, at first, when he looked for wisdom, I'm going to feed my mind. So pleasure and wealth, I'm going to feed my emotion. So, who likes taking tests? Does anybody like taking tests? Anybody just embrace test taking? How would you like to test yourself with pleasure? You ever heard of that before? He's going to conduct an experiment. So, where's the good thing? Is laughter fun? Does he enjoy laughing? Is that going to bring you happiness? Sure it will. But how many comedians do we see who struggle with mental health issues, who commit suicide? And how much is that laughter masking a troubled soul because they're looking around? It's a challenge, isn't it? We see a problem. I've got this restlessness. I can't find peace or meaning within wealth and influence. That's a problem of our time. We have people who have massive amounts of affluence. They have no concept of God and what's going on. I'm bored. I'm looking at anything to fuel any emotional response. And is there satisfaction and contentment in that? So as we look at this is sort of like the stages of life, isn't it? So first he does a test. I'm going to do an experiment with wisdom. And I'm going to test the mental aspect. Then I'm going to do pleasure and wealth. So the first 3 verses, I'm just going to be a pleasure seeker only. I'm going to ignore all of this, everything else. I'm just going to try to have fun and feed my emotion. And then in verse 4, he's going to look at, I'm going to see if I can build and create stuff. So that's sort of like the different stages of our life, isn't it? What happens in the early stages of our life? We go to school. We engage in higher education. We fuel our mind, the mental aspect of man. How many young people do we see go off to college? They're unrestrained by guidance and authority, and they're on their own. And instead of engaging education, they fuel their emotions, and they seek after pleasure, and they make bad choices. Have we seen young people do that before? Pleasure and party seeking. And then after we pass that stage of our life, people tend to drift towards employment and personal success. I'm going to build this. I'm going to create this. I'm going to work and engage in my vocation. So here again, as he lays this out, this old man telling this rambling story, he keeps mirroring the different aspects of life and the different aspects that we need to think about, and we're all experiencing. So how contemporary is this book? It was written 3,000 years ago, and he's talking about what we see surrounding us, don't we? He's talking about existentialism. I sought out pleasure. He's talking about the hedonism we see, the pleasure seeking. Man, this is a contemporary book. Can you think of any other contemporary book written 1,000 years ago that touches our lives? So this rambling story is actually very elegantly thought out. And what's a result of pursuing wisdom and education? What did he say it was? What's the summary of that? Is it satisfying? Grief and pain. How about pleasure and party seeking? What was the summary of that? Is it profitable? You keep guessing for the bottom line. It's unprofitable and futile. How about employment, personal successes, physical and financial interests? Satisfying? It's unprofitable and futile. It's not a very upbeat message right now, is it? He's still in that pessimistic mode. You know, but he says, in chapter 1, he says, I'm going to pursue wisdom. I'm going to seek out wisdom. But then in chapter 2, he says, I'm going to seek out pleasure. But verses 4 through 11, he talks about building and achieving and work. Do we view that as pleasurable? Why did Solomon group work and achievement with the pursuit of pleasure? There's pleasure in reaching goals. So, when man was placed in the garden, after he was kicked out of the garden, he was given the charge of the sweat of your brow, you will work, right? But before that happened, what was his mission in the garden? What was he instructed to do? In the garden, dress the garden. So God has always had a purpose for finite man. And this is a subtle thread that we're going to see all throughout Ecclesiastes. We're going to see work and achievement mixed in. We talked about lex talionis, the law of retribution. As you sow, you reap. But as you work, there is a harvest. He has that concept, but he says, you know what? Man has an obligation to work and to be engaged. And that was God's intent for man and their satisfaction for the finite man. So, God has never meant for man to be idle. And then when we look at the Gospels, when I look at the Gospels, I see the underlying theme of the Gospels as one of stewardship. What does a steward do? He's worked. He's engaged. He's a servant of God. And I think as we look through here, we're going to see that continuous thread that keeps referring back to work and accomplishment. Now, it's futile looking for a meaning of life. But if we're servants of God, our work has a harvest, doesn't it? Because we're working for the infinite man, the soul, not for the finite man that Solomon is struggling with. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in all kinds of them fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female servants and had slaves who were born in my house. Also had great possessions of flocks and herds, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and treasures of king and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. I became great and surpassed all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was the reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So, as I read through this, did you notice any common words in there? We always look for patterns of words. Chapter 2 is the I, me, my, mine chapter. You'll say I, me, my, or mine 32 times. He fits right in on social media, doesn't he? I built great houses. I planted vineyards. I gathered silver and gold. I did all these great things. I, me, mine. Did he find satisfaction in I, me, and mine? What's the difference between planting vineyards and making gardens and parks? That's a couplet. Is he saying it for emphasis? What's the difference? Okay, for a vineyard, that implies I planted. That's something I cultivated to get fruit. I made gardens and parks. Man was placed in a garden. A garden or park in that time was a pleasure place. I created a place strictly for pleasure. Anybody like to go on vacation? When you like to go on vacation, you go to some place that's a pleasure place, don't you? Where can you relax and enjoy what aspect of nature or what aspect of your life you want to enjoy. I built it. I created any place I can go for a vacation. It's right there. So man started off in the garden, but where is man going to wind up? In Revelation, he's going to tell us that we're going to start in the Garden of Eden. We're going to end in the paradise of God. So just like the garden, the same term. Paradise of God, our heavenly home, our future garden, for the infinite man, our soul. Okay, I entertained and enriched myself. I had slaves and servants and herds. You know, the interesting thing, again, given that time, he views slaves and servants the same as his herd, their property. Where did the slaves come from? They're the Canaanites that weren't driven out. The Canaanites that weren't driven out became the servants. And we see that when they took an accounting of the temple servants and servants of Solomon's household, 392. That was a pretty big household. So, he spent 13 years, or 7 years building a temple. He built himself a house. How long did he take building his house? 13 years. Almost double what he spent on God. So he has an abundance of earthly goods, an abundance of property. Verse 8, I acquired silver and gold. How common was silver and gold at this time? First Kings tell us silver was so common, they paved the streets with it. So we find out that he was getting annually 666 talents of gold. We found that in 1 Kings 10:14, annually as tribute. So a talent is about 75 pounds. So struggling, sorry. I looked at the current gold price. Current gold price is $1,915 right now. So if I have 666 talents annually, and let's just make the math easy. Let's say it's $2,000 an ounce. 75 pounds times 600 at 16 ounces per pound would be $1.6 billion in our terms. So we see some people with affluence. We see people in our time who have income of $1.6 billion a year. Big gold takes a downturn. It's $1,500 an ounce, $1.2 billion a year. Remember back from first lesson, we talked about what was the size of the population of the world at that time. The world was a small place. So we see that at David's time, the population was about 1.2 million men, which would mean there's about 5 million people in the country. So the state of Kentucky has right now about 4.5 million. So basically, his kingdom was about the same size as the population of Kentucky. Over 80%, probably over 90% are subsistence farmers, and he has between 1.2 and 1.6 billion dollars of income a year. How's that for a problem of affluence? Makes us pale in comparison, doesn't it? But he said, you know what? Verse 9, I became great. I surpassed everybody before me, but I kept my wits about me. I'm the smartest guy in the world because I'm doing all this as an experiment to find out what the meaning of life is. And that's why he's given us this book. Verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Did he say no to himself? We go to Amazon, we put imaginary things in our shopping cart or our wish list, don't we? But we have limits. Did he have a limit? He indulged everything. You know any children whose parents have never said no to them? How do they turn out? You like those kids? Are they spoiled? He's an adult. He's an old man at that time. Although old is relative. Solomon would die at about age 59 to 60. He became king at age 19. The old is relative. But he's nearing the end of his life, and he recognizes it. So we have a 50-year-something spoiled brat. I've never had no, said to myself. I've indulged anything I've ever wanted. What's the last of the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not covet. When's the last time you heard a sermon on covetousness? What is covetousness about? Desire for something other than desire for God. Did he have a problem with covetousness? Are we surrounded by people who have problems with covetousness? Mike. You left God out. All right. You left gratitude out. And that's what separates. We talked about lesson 1. Everybody who worshiped, again, they worship not for the hope of heaven. Why do they worship? Because they had gratitude for the Creator. They had gratitude for our divinity. And he lost that. Thanks for your participation. We'll continue there next week.